Welcome, and thank you for joining today's FOIA Advisory Committee meeting. Before we begin, please ensure you have opened the WebEx participants and chat panels by using the associated icons located at the bottom right of your screen. And please note that all audio connections are muted and this conference is being recorded. To present a comment via WebEx audio, please click the raise hand icon located right beneath your participants panel to place yourself in the comment queue. If you are connected to today's webinar via phone audio only, please press #2 on your telephone keypad to enter the comment queue. If you require technical assistance, please send a chat to the event producer. With that, I'll turn the meeting over to Committee Chair Alina Simo. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Chris. And I just want to welcome everyone. Good morning, everyone. As the Director of the Office of Government Information Services, OGIS, and this committee's chairperson, it is my pleasure to welcome all of you to our second meeting of the 5th term of the FOIA Advisory Committee. This meeting taking place so soon after our last week's meeting is a bit unusual, but it is our hope that last week's briefings from our committee's designated federal officer, DFO, Kirsten Mitchell, as well as our returning members, Tom Sussman, Patricia Weth, and Dave Collier, help lay the foundation as we roll up our sleeves and get to work today. Committee members, I look forward to a lively but orderly discussion today as we hone in on the 3 subcommittees this committee will form. And I also want to welcome our colleagues and friends from the FOIA community and elsewhere who are watching us today, either via WebEx or with a slight delay on the NARA YouTube channel. Members' names and affiliations are posted on our website, and member biographies will be posted soon. I have a few housekeeping matters to go through first. I am advised that committee member Michael Heiss is unable to join us today, but I'm going to turn over to Kirsten to ask if she has taken a visual roll call and if she could confirm we have a quorum.
Indeed, I can confirm that.
Okay, thank you, Kirsten.
You're welcome.
Meeting materials, thanks. Meeting materials are available on the committee's webpage. Click on the link for the 2022 to 2024 FOIA Advisory Committee on the OGIS website. We will upload a transcript and minutes of this meeting as soon as they are ready in accordance with the Federal Advisory Committee Act. During today's meeting, I want to encourage committee members to use the All Panelists option from the drop-down menu in the chat function when you want to speak or ask a question. Of course, also visually, I'll be looking at my little tiles that I have on my screen to see if anyone is raising their hand. But please also remember to keep the chat function to only administrative matters, nothing substantive, in order for us to comply with the Federal Advisory Committee Act. No substantive comments should be made in the chat function, as they will not be recorded in the transcript of the meeting. If any of our committee members need to take a break at any time, please do not disconnect from the WebEx event. Instead, mute your microphone by using the microphone icon at the bottom of your screen and turn off your camera by using the camera icon. Send us a quick chat, me and Kirsten, to let us know if you'll be gone for more than a few minutes, and join us again as soon as you can. Today, we have not planned to take a break, as we do plan to wrap up by noon Eastern time. So we're going to try to keep to our posted agenda. And a reminder to all committee members and also to myself, because I'm guilty of this, please identify yourself each time you speak by name and affiliation. This helps us greatly down the road with both the transcript and the minutes, both of which are required by the Federal Advisory Committee Act. Finally, I have a few other housekeeping issues to go through before we roll up our sleeves. For those of you watching us on the NARA YouTube channel, the chat is not on today, but we do want to hear from you. If you have questions and comments related to the agenda of today's meeting or any comments or questions, please address them to FOIA-advisory-committee@nara.gov. If you have questions on any other topic for the National Archives, you may direct them to public.affairs@nara.gov. I also want to note that we have received and posted several written comments in advance of today's meeting. We review all public comments and post them as soon as we are able, and if they comply with our public comments posting policy. We have also alerted committee members and have invited them to view the public comments on our website. If anyone wishes to submit any additional written public comments regarding the committee's work, you may do so by emailing FOIA-advisory-committee@nara.gov, and we will consider posting them to the OJS website. In addition to the written public comments we have already posted, we will invite oral public comments at the end of today's meeting, as noted on our agenda. And as we noted in our August 22nd, 2022 Federal Register notice announcing this meeting, public comments will be limited to 3 minutes per individual. Okay, with that, I am going to just ask if any of the committee members have any questions about housekeeping or administrative rules that I just went through. No. Okay. All right. Life is good. All right. So I think we're ready to roll up our sleeves. Again, after Thursday's meeting, everyone knows on the committee that Kirsten emailed asking each one of you to provide your top 2 or 3 FOIA issues that you would like to see the committee focus on this term. And I want to thank everyone for everyone's robust responses. I definitely want to thank Kirsten publicly, as I have thanked her privately already, for all the hard work she's put into compiling everyone's fantastic ideas. They are represented in a spreadsheet that we have posted on our website under the under the meeting rubric for today's meeting. And what Kirsten has done that I think is very helpful is to put the ideas into broad buckets to help start our conversation today. It was interesting to me, I'm just going to comment, that there's definitely a lot of overlap in members' ideas. There are definitely a lot of folks thinking on the same page, so I thought it was very heartened to see that. Definitely seems to be some consensus around, a number of the topics. But certainly the ideas center around 4 very broad areas that, as Kirsten has identified. The first one is review of past committee recommendations. There definitely seems to be a lot of interest in that. FOIA funding and fees was the second category Kirsten identified. FOIA process issues, and the final one, technology. Can't seem to escape that anywhere we go. So there's plenty to talk about. I look forward to our terrific discussion today. As a reminder, after we discuss priorities for the term, the goal is to form 3 subcommittees. Please, not 4. 4 was too much last term. I'm here to say that again. And I just also want to add that does not preclude the formation of smaller working groups under one or all of the subcommittees. So that certainly happened in the last term. We found that quite productive, and I certainly want to encourage that again. And as if everyone has heard last week, much of the committee's work does get done at the subcommittee level in between the full committee meetings. And I want to encourage all committee members to join one or more of the subcommittees. You are by no means precluded from joining more than one. And I definitely want to encourage all of you to think about volunteering for a subcommittee co-chairmanship. We usually encourage one government member and one non-government member just to even things out as co-chairs. So hopefully you're thinking about that in the back of your minds. So I've done a lot of talking. With that, I am going to turn everything over to all of you. And I want to invite all of you to what I hope is a terrific discussion. And I'm going to pause. Who would like to go first?
Alina, this is Kirsten.
Yes.
Pardon the interruption, but if we could ask our event producer to please advance the slide to number 3.
Thank you.
So we have the chat information out there, and then as the committee begins its discussion, the ideas that you just summarized are on slide 4. So,
terrific. Thanks,
you.
Chris. Okay. All right. So I'm not seeing anyone waving at me frantically yet. And I don't expect all of you to jump in at once, but does anyone care to go first?
Hey, Alina.
All right, Adam, are you waving at me?
Yes, I am.
Great. Adam Marshall.
Adam Marshall from the Reporters Committee for Freedom of the Press. Um, First of all, I really appreciate the efforts as noted by Kirsten to try to categorize these in different ways. Um, One of the categories is funding and fees, and I was wondering if some of the people who posted kind of shorter comments just on like FOIA fees or FOIA funding could speak a little bit more as to what they were interested in, because it seems that some of those might be able to be combined with the process category, or be a sub working group within the process category, and that might be an easy way to get us down in terms of the subcommittees.
Yeah, I just, process subcommittee was very active in the last term to address Adam's point, and fees were definitely discussed and looked at. Nothing, no recommendations came out of that last time, but I see that there's continued interest in that, so I definitely want to encourage that. Does anyone else want to take up Adam's invitation to speak to their fee comments? Katrina?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So when I put up there the FOIA funding, I was speaking of, sorry about the barking in the background, the funding for resources for the program, for right sizing, staffing, things like that. The cost for fees, I guess that could actually be lumped into the processing side, which was, I think Adam was alluding to. I wasn't really looking at that because at the department, most of DHS, we don't really collect fees, so that's not a huge issue for us. I'm sure it might be for others, but mine was more so right sizing the offices, getting funding for the federal FOIA programs that are needed. So that's where I was coming from, Adam.
Okay, thanks, Katrina. Anyone else want to follow up on that?
Hi, Alina. This is Patricia Weth from EPA. Regarding fees and FOIA funding, the legislation subcommittee last term, which I co-chaired, we had a working group for both. We had a working group for FOIA funding as well as for fees. We did prepare a subcommittee final report, and the two folks who led those working groups, Matt Schwartz and Alan Lautstein, did I pronounce his name right? Did a really nice paper on it, and we didn't have any recommendations coming out of those working groups. And if I remember correctly, I think Alan's paper really did a great job explaining why he didn't feel that it could go forward. Also, the 2014 to 16 committee, I believe, had a subcommittee just devoted to fees, and I think I showed their subcommittee page. They have a lot of information there, so I just kind of throw that out to share for some help. For the FOIA funding, I don't think we in the legislation subcommittee had enough time to review it, and it was really to look at ways that agencies could get the resources that they needed to accomplish the mission. So I don't know. I hope that's helpful.
I think I saw in the chat that Ginger McCall wanted to weigh in. Ginger?
Yeah, this was on the more general issue, though, not it to answer.
Oh,
Adam's
I'm
question.
sorry. I just saw it, so I apologize.
Sorry.
Well, should I come back to you?
Yeah, I don't have an answer to Adam's question because my responses to the request for comments were lengthy. So.
Okay. All right. We'll come back to you.
Alina, this is Kirsten again. I am terribly sorry to interrupt, but I'm trying to get the attention of Chris, our event producer, to please move the slides forward to slide 4 so that the committee can see these categories. And again, sorry for the interruption.
No problem. Gorka, I think I just saw you chatting.
Yeah, no, this is unrelated to the topic of fees. So as long as that's sort of been concluded, then what I'd like to do is get a sense, just take the temperature on my fellow members' interest in exploring vexatious requests, because I think it's fertile ground for work. I think one of our remits here is to make FOIA more efficient, and it doesn't happen often, but sometimes you'll get a requester that just wants to drum up the works, and or is on some misdirected fishing expedition. I think it'd be helpful for us to explore that topic in order to facilitate FOIA for the rest of the world.
Thank you, Gorka. I know that I saw several other people. Oh, people are waving at me. Okay. Ginger, do you want to go first, and then Katrina?
Sure. Yeah, I'm probably going to get myself cast out of the requester community for saying that I am interested in investigating that topic. I will also note that, to my recollection, in the very first iteration of this committee, there was a bit of study that we did on vexatious requesters and provisions from governments around the world, and I think maybe state governments. I recall working on that as part of whatever committee I was on. So I think we've already sort of laid some groundwork for that. And though that wasn't one of the 3 topics that I picked, I think it's a useful topic. So, because there are certain requesters who are taking up an outsized amount of government resources, it's clogging up the queue for everyone else. Oftentimes the requests are not at all clear or narrow. And oftentimes it seems like they're submitted just to harass agencies or harass particular officials or gum up the works. So I think it would be a useful thing to look at, given that there are limited resources to process FOIA requests. And when one person takes up all those resources or clogs up the queue, it does affect the rest of us who are requesting.
Okay, Katrina's next, and Ben, I see you waving, so you'll go right after that. And Tom.
I'd like to look into this a little bit too, and it's not for the purposes of one of the things that I've tried to do in the 27 years I've been doing FOIA is trying to be reasonable with requesters, especially with people suing us on the 21st day, trying to give them something. If not, I can't sometimes give them everything. I just can't. I don't have enough resources. I've never had enough resources. Like I said, I've been doing this back in the day when we were using X-Acto knives, cutting holes in papers. So I've always tried to be accommodating to the point that let me give you something, and sometimes there's requesters out there that just won't do that, and so and some of the requests that they write are very large, very voluminous. We don't have the, again, like everybody else has said, we don't have the resources to, I would love to accommodate people. I'm sure everybody else here feels the same way. I would love to be able to do them all, but we've got to figure out some way to balance that a little bit better, or come up with some kind of way to have a mutual agreement, some kind of way to come together with that. So if there was a way that we could talk about this topic and maybe find some approaches to address it, I would be 100% supportive of that.
Okay. Thanks, Katrina. I appreciate it. I think Ben was going to go next, and then Tom, and then I see Dave waving at me too.
Yes, thank you. This is Ben Tingo. I fourth Gorka's recommendation. I do think that it's probably the first task in addressing this is really defining what it means for a request to be vexatious. And it sounds like there would actually be several categories, whether that's a request that's submitted in bad faith, whether it's a particularly voluminous request that's intended to gum up the works or a duplicative request in coordination with others. That's sort of, I think, what we've seen some recent news items about sort of physical denial of service attacks as they've been described in the media for election offices, getting duplicative requests that are intended to take up resources and time and are really not serving the purpose of FOIA, of actually getting the information that's requested for transparency purposes and for helping with governance. But it does seem like that's sort of the first issue, is really defining what it means to be vexatious. And then I think what we'll find is that it will lead into several of the other topics that several committee members have identified as being sort of subtopics, whether it's proactive disclosures, search, ability to toll the clock when you're sort of crafting a request and getting to what the substance is and what you can do on a rolling basis to help somebody understand what they're looking for, what they're going to be getting, and what the timelines might be, and helping to limit some of that. So I think that maybe for under a process framework, that would be a sort of good start to then lead out of that into several other working groups, but really lock down that definition in the beginning of the term in a way that you can then lead and define it a little bit more detail of then how do you address each of those categories in a reasonable way without sort of leaving it open to interpretation on a agency by agency basis of really saying, well, this is vexatious to us, and so we're not going to respond or do this our own way, but in a way that can really be tailored in a meaningful way to educate requesters what might be categorized that way, and maybe leading eventually towards some sort of codification of that type of category or what the options available are to the agency and FOIA personnel as a whole across the board.
Okay, thanks, Ben. I appreciate all that. I think Tom had been waving at me and then Dave, but Stephanie Jewett also wanted to chime in. Stephanie, I'm sorry if I skipped over you. Is there something you wanted to talk about back to fees, or are we on vexatious requests?
No, thank you. My comment went back to the FOIA funding, and I just wanted to comment that I submitted the FOIA funding, and it was mostly in the realm of technology, so I think mine could definitely be looped into technology. I was looking at what resources would be needed to fund the technology.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that.
Thank you.
All right, Tom.
Yeah, I had a chance to sort of look at David's, having divided up the 4 general categories into 3. And it does seem to me that resources is a sort of a good separate category, both at the larger level and then going down into the more specifics. And implementation, as you know, every time I talk about FOIA and the advisory committee, I talk about implementation, going back to the fee recommendation of the first committee. And there's always, you know, what am I saying? I lost the word. What's the dashboard is only, you know, halfway helpful, because it says yes, the archivist made the recommendation, forwarded the recommendation to wherever, but it doesn't say that the recipient or target has done anything with it. So I feel very strongly that, and that may well involve some working groups looking at very specific issues and coming up with strategies really to advance it. The bigger challenge in I guess Dave's third category, process and technology together, is there's a lot of sort of apples and oranges or apples and rocks. I mean, I'm not sure how the technology and vexatious requests kind of fit together. I mean, can, you know, in the same category, but except for maybe the vexatious and burdensome issue, which there seems to be some interest in, I think technology does cover most of the process issues. So I'm not sure where do we, I guess I'd like to focus in on where we put the issue, since there is interest in addressing burdensome, vexatious, unreasonable, etc. Where do we put that? And if we figure out how to put that in a way that makes sense, then I think we've got 3 subcommittee, you know, subcommittees that would be pretty self-evident at that point.
So, Tom, just to summarize, and I know, Dave, you want to go next. What I'm hearing you say is resources, implementation of past recommendations, and then I'm hearing process/technology as the third
Right.
one.
Right.
Okay, I
Yes.
just wanted to make sure I heard. Dave.
Yeah, thanks, Alina. And I wonder if I could be enabled to share real quick. I emailed Tom I tried to clump all that stuff into 3 working groups or subcommittees that make sense. And then within those subcommittees, you can have any number of working groups, right? And certainly vexatious requests is probably going to come up. It came up last term. So I'm happy to show just what Tom was talking about to the group if I have the ability to share. Oh, thank you so much. All right. So this is kind of what I was thinking about. Do y'all see that?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So it seemed like because our objective right now, I think, first is to get the 3 subcommittees nailed down. And then within those, anybody could create working groups to kind of get specifics. This isn't perfect, things can float among different subcommittees, but it seemed clearly like some kind of follow-up subcommittee made sense, a taking stock subcommittee to review all the previous work and studies, because there's been a lot of work already done on vexatious requests, for example, maybe figure out, like Tom said, what's been completed and what needs to still have work. There are recommendations that probably need more work, and then the OJA stuff. And then how we break down the other 2 subcommittees, it's up for debate. We could have a resources subcommittee, funding fees subcommittee, where we're talking about money stuff. I put vexatious under there, mostly because last term that came out of our discussion of fees. We're finding out that, fees, I think, are sometimes used as a way to get requesters to hone their requests overly broad, so they just throw out lots of fees, and it's a tool to combat vexatious or overburdensome or what voluminous requests. So maybe it fits under there, maybe it's under process, but we could clump process and tech under one subcommittee. If it makes sense, processing records through AI or machine learning could fit under process, and I'm not sure we had enough subtopics to create a single tech subcommittee this term. I only saw a couple truly tech topics in the spreadsheet. So that's one way to approach it. Form 3 subcommittees like this, and then from there we can discuss what working groups people want to do, start up. Certainly that probably doesn't have to be handled today. That could be done later, once the subcommittee's going. But if that makes sense of clumping these topics, and there may be others that come up, another approach is to instead go ahead and throw the funding stuff into process and make tech separate, But again, I don't know. I'm kind of veering toward the first one. I think the process subcommittee under this scenario would be pretty huge, and boy, whoever would be on that and co-chairing it, it wouldn't be me. So that's
Why
just
not?
my thinking. That's just my thinking, and I'll stop sharing. But if anybody else would like to go another way, I'm not tied to anything. I'm just trying to get the discussion going so we can form 3 subcommittees and then create working groups from there.
Great. Thank you, Dave.
Sure.
Anyone else inspired by David Collier's presentation? Patricia, was that you raising your hand or no? Oh, no, Gorka was raising his hand.
Yeah, if I might, I was just thinking through this, and I'll just say I'm new to the committee. Does it make sense? Because it seems like process, for example, has a lot of topics, and then this recommendation to review past work, which I endorsed, right? It's really just one thing. Like, does it deserve an entire subcommittee when it's really one thing? And then we have things like process, which have a list of 17. Does that make sense? I mean, can we make the review of sort of historical recommendations and their progress and their effect a topic for a working group?
Yes, that's always possible. Yeah, Jason, and I see Ginger waving at me too. Jason, go ahead.
I had my
Ginger,
hand
you're
up.
next.
Okay. As for a past committee recommendations committee, we've had 51 recommendations, and my view is that it's extremely important in this fifth term to look at compliance with those recommendations. OGIS has done a fantastic job with the dashboard, and in many respects, OGIS and OIP have completed the first step in implementing past recommendations, but there has been no survey of compliance. And I suspect, even though I've been out of government for a while, that many agencies are either unaware of our recommendations or are not prioritizing them in a sense that they would be reporting to NARA or OIP about what they have done. So I think there's kind of an enlightenment factor. I think we could, it would do well, and it's an extremely big effort to try to come up with strategies for finding out what is going on. We have a huge government, 300 reporting components to NARA, and it would take a tremendous amount of work. So I strongly have advocated. I wrote the paragraph in a prior final report that advocated that the committee devote substantial time in a subcommittee to look at past recommendations. Let me also point out that I really appreciate David's work in clustering this. A number of the line items under process have been in the past considered, and I think we would do well to limit any kind of process / improvement / implementation type committee to a limited set of topics. For example, records management. We devoted substantial time, and there's many recommendations that came out of 2 terms ago. So there are ways to limit it to make it more even. Lastly, as many of you know, I have been on a soapbox about technology and machine learning, and there are other aspects of this, including the growth of text and ephemeral messaging that's been in the news, and a number of ways to approach technology, including kind of an adequacy of search that we could discuss in such a committee. So, in sum, my recommendation is to balance what's going on in process, but to have a past recommendations subcommittee, a committee that is either called under Tom's words implementation or process. My favorite would be FOIA improvement committee. I know that's everything we do, but I think we could use that as an umbrella term. But whatever term you want, process has already been used in a prior iteration of this committee. And then an advanced technology, or just technology, which has also been a term used, but I think it's technology is an extremely important issue to look at as we're looking forward. We had a vision committee a couple terms ago. We're looking to 2030 and the growth of billions and billions of agency records that are going to be FOIA-able. So I'm an advocate in that way to have 3 committees.
And Jason, thanks for all your comments. I just want to be clear, I understand your proposal. You want past recommendations, the FOIA improvement subcommittee, and a technology subcommittee.
That's correct.
Okay, and you're volunteering to co-chair all 3 of those subcommittees, correct?
No, I actually am volunteering a couple of others to
Okay. Well, we'll talk
co-chair.
about that as well.
But yes, I would take on the technology committee, and I would be happy to serve on all three subcommittees.
Okay. I was just kidding
Yes,
about that, but
I
I want
understand.
to leave that floor open. So Ginger has been waiting very patiently, and then Mende would like to also comment. So Ginger first.
So I was going to suggest that we just kind of roll the review of past committee recommendations into each of the other committees, but having heard Jason's comments, I actually do think it's important. I'm swayed on the idea that perhaps we should include that as a separate committee on its own. But I don't think that we should drop FOIA resources as a committee. I think that is the single most pressing issue, and it's a place where our recommendations stand to actually make a difference. Congress keeps passing bills with more reporting requirements, with more changes to FOIA, and at the end of every bill, it says no additional resources are allocated. So I think having a conversation about resources and the way that resources affect processing times and the efficiency and effectiveness of responses to FOIA requests is really important. I will note that both OGIS and Congress have asked GAO to do an investigation into FOIA resources. I don't know if that's forthcoming, but I think this is an area where the committee could do some investigating, could look at some numbers, could talk to some folks and make some real meaningful recommendations. And I think under that umbrella, technology fits really well. I will also note that I co-chaired a subcommittee on technology, I think 2 terms ago, which made very robust recommendations. We have spent a lot of time talking about technology already. We've made a long list of recommendations, which were very specific to my recollection. So I think we've already done a lot of work on that. I will note I have not had time to go back and review all of the advisory committee's prior work and prior recommendations, but I think that that's something that would be a good investment of time on my part and on everyone's part. I think that's homework that we should do before we do our next meeting, is go back and look at all the recommendations that this committee has made in the past. So we're not, redoing work that has already been done and reinventing the wheel.
Okay. Thanks, Ginger. Thanks for all those comments. So instead of Jason's FOIA Improvement Subcommittee, I'm hearing you say FOIA Resources Subcommittee. Okay, just want to make sure.
I would have it be review past committee recommendations, process, and resources. So basically what David did. And thank you, David, by the way, for putting that together. That's really helpful.
Okay.
Alina, Alex would like to speak.
Yeah, but I promised Mende she would go next.
Okay.
Hi, thanks, Selena. This is Mende Johnson, University of Georgia, and I actually had a comment that was going in the direction of Ginger's initial comment about the review, and maybe this is where Gorka was going as well, in terms of having the review of past recommendations being folded into 3 other categories. Because I wonder if you can have a situation where there's some review of past recommendations happening on that committee, but in the other areas, in looking at the new suggestions being put forth, that will also involve reviewing past recommendations. So I wonder if you would have some duplication there. And one way to prevent that is by having, say, a funding subcommittee, but having a working group that's focused on looking at their past recommendations in that area to perhaps reduce some duplication. But if the review is a separate committee, I think making sure there's a way of communicating between the review committee and the other substantive committees about what's being reviewed and what's being looked at towards going forward.
Okay, thanks, Mende. I do want to say, I feel as though Kirsten and I do a fair amount of trying to promote continuity among all the subcommittees. And certainly when we hear topics that are being raised in one subcommittee, we make sure we bring it to the attention of the others. And there's going to be overlap. Unfortunately, there's just the nature of the beast. We try to coordinate as much as possible to make sure folks are talking to each other. And in fact, I believe in the last term, maybe some of the folks who were on the last term can nod if they agree, working groups crossed over a couple of the subcommittees, and it seemed to work out very well. Dave is like maybe not so sure, but I think it worked out okay. Certainly everyone was talking to each other, and that's the most important thing. Alex would like to go next. Or not. Alex, are you there?
There we go. I think that's
Okay.
working. Okay.
Yes, we can hear you.
So I just to quickly circle back to something earlier, my primary concern with vexatious requests and spending any time on that is whether that might lead to endorsing effectively an unwritten exemption from FOIA. Because I can tell you that lots of public officials find the requests from journalists and watchdogs pretty vexatious. And so I'd be mindful that the committee isn't essentially taking the position that I would think Congress should. And I just be careful about that from the requester side, because it's not hard to see how that might be abused. That aside, I wanted to suggest that there's an opportunity for the committee to meet its charter in a way that it, I think, hasn't fully done before, and that's the impending retirement of FOIAonline.gov, something that we've talked about in the past at these meetings, certainly that's been in the public sphere because OGIS testified about it. We had a FOIA hearing back in Sunshine Week in March, but it hasn't come up very much. And the administration is not, to my observation, engaging the public about this. It seems to me that if we're going to talk about committees, that a technology committee that's specifically looking at how the roughly 24 agencies that were using the EPA's FOIA online site, what they're transitioning to and how that transition is going, and using that as a case study to understand what's happening and to really reach out to the requester community for each of those agencies and understand what's happening. That could really inform our recommendations. My sense is that there's a natural interest in using the expertise of the people on the committee to focus on making recommendations. But the more that we can bring the public, specifically the requester community, into those, I think it will strengthen them. It'll certainly, I think, add to the legitimacy in terms of its perceived legitimacy if we are actively soliciting feedback from the people who are affected by that change, and then look at how each one of those agencies is approaching this in terms of a blank slate. If you're leaving this approach, what technology you're choosing? How does it affect your processes? Are you putting up your FOIA liaisons number? Are you asking for feedback from the requesters? Are you, if you're adopting a new platform, are you building it with the requesters or not? And I'd love to see that transition is something that the committee is actively monitoring and engaged in, and that is providing recommendations in response to what I think we can expect will be some bumps along the way. So I just wanted to throw that out there and to yes and a lot of the other things that have been said about the other issues.
Okay, thanks, Alex. Ben, did you have your hand up earlier and I missed you?
Yeah, I did. I was going to say basically just to, I guess, jump on board with David's grouping. I think that makes a lot of sense the way he has it. And I agree with you, Alina, and other people that have said that there's most certainly going to be overlap between prior recommendations and some of these other categories. And we would obviously be remiss to not build off of what was done before and what was suggested before. And that will come up particularly in technology and funding and resources and a lot of these other areas. But it probably does make sense to have it as a specific subcommittee so it gets the attention and the focus that it deserves, which will really go also then to the heart of what the committee is here for and measuring effectiveness without having it totally buried within a working group, within a subcommittee, but really elevating that impact. I would just note from Alex's comments recently too, just honestly, from an industry perspective, that a lot of this is moving forward, is currently in activity of agencies transitioning from their FOIA online platform to other platforms. It looks like the experience is not so much process focused, but really in a market research phase where each one is finding the tools that best meet their needs. And I know from our experience that when agencies are going through this process of finding new technology in these areas, they are very influenced by making sure that they're not leaving any technology behind and that they're not leaving anything on the table or any functionality behind. And so what they're trying to do best they can is match up current functionality, current process to a new tool, to a new adoption. It may not have so much requester input specific to it, but to the extent that the requester community makes suggestions through these other committees, like process suggestions, reporting suggestions, certainly resources and all that, those do filter into these platforms and these tools that are then available in a commercial market to every agency to leverage as part of their FOIA process. So I'm not so sure that FOIA Online specifically deserves the subcommittee's attention, but it will come in at the fringes of process, technology, resources, not just when you're looking at what's going to be happening in 2023 from the transition on a case management perspective, but also pushing out to Jason's perspective view of, 2030, right? We're sitting on top of a mountain that is only getting larger and larger. And so it's one thing to say what's happening now, which is in process, and we might not have a lot of ability to sway that process from a committee perspective. But, we may be best sort of being able to focus and keep our heads up a little bit above the fray and look a little bit forward to things that we actually can influence.
Okay, thanks, Ben. I just want to repeat a comment that was made in the chat from Dave Collier, just clarifying to Alex that he's signaling follow-up, process, and tech as the 3 subcommittee recommendations as per Jason. Alex, does that sound right?
Yeah, sorry, I'm slow on the mute button today. That does sound right. One of my specific priorities is to harmonize the Open Government Data Act of 2018 with FOIA and proactive disclosure. That's the thing I sent in tardily. And the extent to which the committee can, I think, promote and extend and defend those best practices around the default being open, both in format and in disclosure, we'll be well served. I certainly would like the committee not to just limit our influence, so to speak, to putting out recommendations or reports. I think that we can and should be using this platform as a way to actively encourage agencies to be embracing not just modern technology, but a more forward stance with respect to the requester community than is currently the case. I think that the committee, as chartered, has that within its remit, and it's up to all of us to decide how we want to approach that.
Okay. I know Gorka has been waiting really patiently. Gorka, please. Thank you.
Gorka from NIH. One of the things, I think my comment will touch on a few topics here. Benedict was concerned about duplicative efforts. We're all, I think, very interested to see how much the recommendations from these committees are being followed up on. And one thing that strikes me is during its 2016-2018 term, this advisory committee recommended that the Chief FOIA Officers Council form a technology subcommittee. And they did. And I've been part of it for 3 years. And I've been co-chairing, some of these working groups that have been dealing with these issues for about 3 years, like FOIA Online. So obviously I think technology is important because I've been dedicating my time to it for 3 years. I'm interested to see what you all think about the fact that, we're proposing to start up a subcommittee on something that my subcommittee has been working on for 3 years already. And, just to give you an idea of the topics that we've been dealing with and we're dealing with now, search and AI, artificial intelligence, FOIA IT platforms to address the fact that FOIA Online sunsets, We have a data working group. We have an IT integration group. We have a 508 compliance working group. We have a FOIA and classified records working group. We have a technology best practices working group, and we have a FOIA reference model working group. And these are just this year's working groups. We've been working on other topics over the past 2 years. So, you know, obviously, and by the way, everybody here is very close to the topics. So people volunteered based upon their expertise. So I think what we can add from our perspective is the fact that we have members of the public, right, that can contribute to these conversations, which is something that isn't present in the Chief FOIA Officers Council subcommittee. But at the same time, I wonder whether delving into these topics 3 years after the technology subcommittee started dealing with them is somewhat duplicative. I wonder whether there is space for maybe communication with that subcommittee, you know, and maybe I'm speaking out of line, and I hope I'm not stepping on anybody's toes. I just wonder whether, you know, we can launch, you know, into a 2-year term dealing or talking about artificial intelligence when, you know, we've been doing it on the other side for 3 years.
Dave, I saw that you were raising your hand. And then Era wants to go next. Okay.
Yeah, I think you raised some good points, Gorka. And just the last term, we did have working groups working on some of these issues. And in fact, one was on AI, I believe. But and we had some recommendations specific to technology come out of all that. But that's what they kind of discovered was, and they started looking into FOIA Online replacements. And they realized, oh, wow, there's this other group that's been working on this for some years. What can we really add? And I think they, you know, for whatever reason, didn't proceed, probably because of that. So, but there's nothing to say that, you know, we can't have a working group looking into AI and FOIA Online and other tech issues in tandem with the other group. I think perhaps that's what's going to happen with the OGIS recommendations. We might be working in tandem with the feasibility study that is commissioned, perhaps. So, so yeah, I think you're right, Gorka, that it's useful to look and see how we can work and fit with that to be most effective. Like Alex is saying, you know, it'd be nice to have some impact and not just toss out recommendations that may be followed or not. So really, to me, it comes down to, I mean, again, I'm kind of focused on just getting 3 subcommittees arranged, and then, you know, the working groups kind of fall into place. And certainly under the process, whatever implementation, FOIA improvement committee, subcommittee, it doesn't have to be 20 working groups. I just tossed everything that was mentioned. Some of those will collapse into some, you know, we have to triage and go with priorities and won't really be handled, or some will be picked up halfway through the term, which happened in previous terms, and taken up later. So, so I guess to me the question is, do we go follow-up subcommittee? I think most people are on board with that. I mean, really, I think you're right, Jason. This is our taking stock term. I mean, there's so many recommendations. We got to figure out what's happened and what needs more work, what hasn't moved forward. So maybe there's agreement on that. Then it comes down to the other two. You know, do we do resources and process / tech, or do we do process and tech? You know, I don't have strong feelings either way, because either way, the work's going to get done. Either way, working groups will be formed under one or the other, and we'll get moving. But if people have strong feelings either way on those clumpings, probably now's the time for us to shore that up, get that done. Thanks,
Okay.
Selena.
Ginger, I see you, but Era, I promised Era she would go next. Ben, did you also wave at me?
Yes.
Okay. So I'm going to say, and Katrina's now waving at me. Adam, are you waving at me, or you're just sitting back? You're just sitting back. Okay. And Era, before you go, I just want to remind everyone, please don't put substantive chats in the all panelists chat comments. I see a comment from Alex that I'm going to read out loud. Note that there are no deliverables for public engagement or feedback on FOIA Online transitions for FOIA Officers Council. I assume that means FOIA Chief Officers Council. No event for requisites, nor transparency about what platforms or tech agencies have chosen or why or cost. Okay, Era, over to you.
Hi, Era Tanzi, University of Cincinnati. I am a new member of the committee, so I hope I'm not speaking out of turn or taking us on a detour that members of the committee would wish that we don't go down. I noticed when I was looking at the spreadsheet that there are at least a few of us who are interested in the legislative question of expansion of FOIA to Congress and the judiciary. And I know that also, thanks to Patricia, who had mentioned in the chat that under the last term, there was a legislation subcommittee and there was a recommendation about expanding FOIA to Congress. So I think my two-part question for my fellow members of the committee is there appetite for engaging in some of these larger legislative questions of expansion of FOIA for this term? Because if I'm, the only one, I'm happy to serve elsewhere. But the second is that where do we think, since this is, the question of expansion of FOIA into places where it doesn't currently exist, and a lot of the prior discussion has been about improvements to places where FOIA already exists. Where do we think that fits into some of the subcommittee models that are under discussion? So I just wanted to step back and listen. Thank you.
Okay. Era, thank you. And I know that I promised Ginger and Ben that they would go, but Bobby, I think, also wanted to speak earlier, so I apologize. I'm going to take everyone out of turn. Bobby, over to you.
Thank you, Alina. Bobby Talebian, Department of Justice, OIP. I just wanted to chime in, and I think I don't feel strongly about the three groupings because I think I agree with Dave that I think under any variation of how we categorize them, we could fit pretty much the working groups that we want to prioritize. I would probably suggest that we do review, resources, and process because I think technology could fit under both process and funding. And I also agree with Gorka that we want to be careful not to duplicate efforts. So in picking like what technology things we're going to look at, that's something that we should consider. The one thing I wanted to turn back to is there's a lot of discussion about vexatious requesters. I think that's just maybe it's unfortunate categorizing or description of what the issue is. So I think it's an issue that should be looked into and it's important, but we shouldn't characterize it as vexatious. It's really the impact of high volume requests and high volume records or substantially large requests in one, and the reason I think it'd be great for this committee to look at it is because what I thought was really successful and I really enjoyed the last committee and some of the other committees is the insight that was shared between what the requesters perceive and see and what the agencies see and perceive. And I think we learned a lot and we're able to make really great recommendations based off that. So I think there's an area here. Now, I'm not saying that this is something that would lead into, and I don't think it should, something that is a barrier to access, because that's not what the mission of FOIA is, and that's not what we want as FOIA professionals. It's just an understanding, and then maybe an exploring of how we can help the system. Communication is something that's come up, but there may be other things. I think it's something worthy of one of the committee's working groups, but I thought maybe we shouldn't categorize it that way, and we should look at it more positively because it's an issue, and I think it's worth exploring, and it could fit under funding or process.
Okay, thanks, Bobby. I appreciate that. I just also want to chime in, taking off my chairperson hat and putting on my co-chair hat of the Chief FOIA Officers Council, along with Bobby. It was definitely a challenge, and maybe Allison will speak to this when it's her turn, but it was definitely a challenge to coordinate the discussions that were going on between the technology subcommittee of this committee and the technology committee of the Chief FOIA Officers Council. And Gorka was actually, I just want to applaud him for 1 second because he had graciously volunteered from the technology committee to be the conduit as well, and he was keeping folks posted on what was happening at our FOIA Advisory Committee meeting, so that was very helpful as well. But it was definitely a challenge, and I'm really a big fan of not reinventing the wheel or also duplicative work. So I think if we can avoid that, that would be really helpful. So that's just my 2 cents. I wrote in the chat just administratively, Ginger, Ben, Tom, Allison. And then in between, I might have missed Katrina, and I apologize to Katrina. So Katrina, can I add you at the end? Okay. So
and there's also Luke. This is Kirsten. Yeah, there's also
Luke.
Luke.
Good. Okay, Luke, I will add you to the list. So Ginger is first.
And Alita, Jason Barron, I'd like to.
And Jason. Okay, got it.
I had suggested technology as one of the 3, and I'm withdrawing that suggestion based on what Gorka said. I just think we have limited time and resources. There's no reason to duplicate what we have already done on this committee, which, again, I would encourage folks to look at the prior recommendations that we made on technology. They were granular and fairly comprehensive. And I think that technology can be folded under all 3 of the categories of reviewing past recommendations, resources, and process issues. I mean, I think it slots into all of those categories. We've already done the work. As Gorka said, there's another committee doing the work on this. And I don't want us to miss the focus on the resources issue. And resources isn't just about technology. It's about staffing. It's about agency investment in FOIA. And until we address the problem of agency investment in FOIA, I don't think that we can address any of the other problems with FOIA. So, yeah, just withdrawing my initial suggestion for technology.
All right, sounds good. Thank you, Ginger. Ben Tingo, I think, was next.
I want to say I agree that Gorka raised some very valid points here, and that it seems like not just that we don't want to not have duplicative effort, we also don't want to be spinning our wheels in an area where we'll have to bring in a lot of the same resources that the Chief FOIA Committee has already engaged with, and sort of going back over and doing that. But it does sound like, to Alex's point, we do have an opportunity here that they don't necessarily have, which is getting a lot of requester input and also educating the broader requester community and everybody about what is out there, what's possible, and what activity is going on within our government to address these problems that is obviously at the forefront of everybody's minds. So I think that there's 2 parts where this will probably come up in some of the current committees. One is reviewing prior recommendations regarding adoption of technology and the prior suggestions about adopting technology and checking on the status of that, which will likely lead into the resources issue as well. And also maybe reviewing our engagement with the Chief FOIA Officers Council and making some recommendations around transparency around their activities or suggestions to them about educating the general public about their activities, and maybe doing, I don't know exactly what's been happening necessarily. I understand what you said, Gorka, has been sort of a conduit, but maybe having a better outlet so that people can know this is something we're aware of, this is something we're on top of, this is something that is being worked on and managed. So that might be something we would want to consider under a process or prior recommendations there too. To Era's point, though, which branches off in a new area, I'm also very interested in exploring sort of expansions of FOIA. I do think that will come under maybe prior recommendations as to see what the sticking point was. I think that there were some prior recommendations around that, and maybe also in a process. And just as a general matter, I think it may help. I know that there's probably a lot of resistance in Congress to making themselves subject to this, which is something worth exploring. But if it happened, that might be what it takes to break the logjam in resources and funding, frankly, is that if they're sort of feeling the pain and seeing it from the inside of what all the executive branch is currently experiencing. Just my 2 cents. I think it's something worth exploring and at least getting to the heart of and publicizing what the difficulty is.
Great segue into Tom, who led the effort on recommendation 2021-01 for Congress, certain congressional offices making FOIA-like rules applied to them. Tom.
So I just quickly on that subject, I do think that we have a foundation on legislative branch, and we started work on judicial branch. We gathered information. We had some data. We didn't want to move further without having some conversations with judicial branch representatives, and so that didn't happen, and so we sidetracked it. But it is it certainly is one that I think there are a few of us would like to build on. I want to come back to Era's comment about legislative recommendations and expanding FOIA. Ginger will know well that there's been efforts for the last 2 years, bi-weekly meetings of large numbers of civil society people trying to put together and work with bipartisan groups on the Hill on some FOIA amendments, and it never happened. And so I think that there's a lesson there. That if groups with access to the legislative process, lobbyists, political suasion, can't make progress with the chief FOIA proponents on the Hill, Cornyn, Leahy, Grassley, then a advisory committee recommendation might be really interesting and useful from an academic perspective. But I certainly wouldn't put it up there as something that was likely to be implemented in, I would say my lifetime, but that may not be that long.
Okay, thanks, Tom. Ginger just commented that we still have hope. So one can hope. Okay, I think over to Allison Dietrich next. And Allison, not to call out on you and put you in a difficult situation, but I just want to say you did co-chair the subcommittee on technology, and perhaps you have some thoughts on how technology fits into this term.
I do actually. Two things. One, the earlier comments about FOIA Online, the technology committee, our subcommittee did actually kind of have a working group with some of the process subcommittee people about ways to go forward from the sunsetting of FOIA Online. We weren't able to make any recommendations during the last term, but that was something that we were very aware of, especially from Commerce. We were one of the 20 or so affected agencies. In terms of input, there's a short time frame with the acquisition schedule. I'm not so sure how much work can be done in terms of the successor to FOIA Online, especially because agencies need to make their own choices about which software fits their needs going forward. So I'm not sure how much we could do with that. But in terms of technology, I agree that it probably could be looped into process or some of the other committees, but there is an advantage to having requester input as compared to just what the CFO Council is doing. And we did have some of the CFO councils come talk to us, the technology committee, and we were trying to come up with ways where we could build on the work that they were doing and not step on toes and reinvent the wheel. So that was something we were very aware of during the last term. And then thirdly, I'm not a big fan of the prior recommendations subcommittee, but I know I'm very outnumbered in that regard. I think they could be wrapped into the other committees that we create. And also, there's only so much that an advisory committee can do in terms of how the agencies decide to implement the recommendations or not implement it. So that's my 2 cents on that. Thanks.
Okay. Okay, then next after Allison, we have Katrina. Thank you for waiting so patiently. Katrina?
This is Kirsten. Katrina, are you on mute?
Katrina, just make sure your phone isn't on mute either.
Okay, we'll come back to you. Yes, we'll circle back to you. Luke is up next, and thank you, Luke. We haven't heard from you yet, so welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. Luke Nichter at Chapman University. Busy discussion. Tough to elbow my way in here. Just have a couple quick comments. I'm not so concerned about what those committees are called. I think has been said by others. I think the working groups will do the work no matter what. I feel like most of my interest is on process, so I figure that's where I'll end up landing. But I do have a couple comments on that, but also other subjects. I'm interested in Era's comment and others on expanding the reach of the FOIA, and I'd like to know more about past recommendations and work that's been done on that front, because I wonder if the right criteria have been proposed or established that might make that a more welcoming idea and not itself a kind of vexatious request, which is going to be my second comment. But I am interested in, one of my comments was focused on certain categories of legislative records that might be the kind of low-hanging fruit based on the age of the records or the subject matter or something, and make this, I guess, a friendlier conversation with the other branches of government is kind of my idea there, and I'd like to know more about past activity. And then on vexatious requests, I don't know that I will be on that subcommittee if it's grouped out the way that it is, but I would just make a suggestion that I was going to comment initially when Ben brought that up early in the meeting, and then it was kind of overtaken by events, but then Alex brought it up again. So I figured, well, let me jump in here before it moves on. I think how we define vexatious requests and requesters needs to be really carefully done if we get into this. I have submitted many FOIA requests. I have never submitted a FOIA request in a vexatious spirit. I think the average age of the records I request is at least 50 years old. Yet I have been routinely listed as a vexatious requester by a major government agency. That's definitely not what I do. And so I think we have to be really careful that this concept is not used to deny requesters simply because the nature of their requests happen to be complex or involve a lot of agency referrals, or happen to be large volume, high tier, whatever you want to call it, types of requests. So I just want to be very careful on that, and we're not accidentally creating precedent that we don't end up wanting to live with. Otherwise, that's my piece. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Luke. So I promised Jason next. Kirsten then wants to weigh in, and Mende came back, and then Katrina, we'll circle back to you. Is that good? Okay. Jason.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
So, really good ideas on the committee structure from everyone. Let me say I was impassioned about technology. Let me, as a first thing, say that it probably, from an optics perspective, naming committees that are the same names as a prior term is probably disfavored. And so process and technology are probably not the best terms to use for any subcommittee. I have my favorite, which is Tom's idea about FOIA implementation rather than process. And for technology, I liked Alex's friendly amendment that it would be better served to call something modernization, which is a broader term that, in my mind, I liked Alex's point about FOIA Online. I know what Ben said and others, but there are lots of ways that we could think about modernizing FOIA. And let me get on my soapbox here again, that I think this committee, even if, Gorka, there is a FOIA Chief Counsel's committee that is working on many forward-looking issues, this committee has a different charter, and it is public-facing with public members and input. And it is the signal issue of our time. If you ask anyone in the requester community, and I have become one of those requesters, probably not vexatious, but I've only filed one request to 40 agencies and gotten very little back. The fact is that the signal issue is that FOIA doesn't work very well for many requesters in the public interest community and the greater community at large. I think we have to acknowledge that. I think during this term, I'm going to be suggesting that individuals that litigate against the government talk to us about what we can do as a committee. It is really important to think about modernizing FOIA for the future, because 10 years from now, the government will be simply overwhelmed by the volume of electronic records that exist. And so there I continue to lobby for that being a prime focus of the committee. Having said that, I don't really care as long as the ideas are part of some subcommittee. It doesn't have to be that we're talking about machine learning as a prime subject of a modernization committee. It could fit into an improvement committee or a process committee. Yeah, I echo what people have said, which is that as long as good ideas are somewhere in some working group, doesn't really matter. However, from past experience serving on this committee as a whole, 2 terms ago, people tend to gravitate to committees they feel most comfortable with that that have some holistic view of what they're doing. And so there is, for me, a modernization committee would be a place where those of us who are more inclined to think about technology and about the world of electronic records would gravitate. And an improvement committee or an implementation committee would be a place where people who are passionate about resources and funding would be part of that. And the last thing I say is about past recommendations in that committee. I conceive it as limited in scope, not 51 recommendations with a survey necessarily, but triaging what is important in what the last 4 terms of the committee have done, and try to focus in areas that are of greatest interest. So it's not a boil the ocean subcommittee, not intended, at least in my mind, to be that way. That's it.
Okay. So thank you, Jason. There's been a little bit of activity on chat. Tom Sussman, I guess, chalking up another vote for modernization, along with Alex and Jason now. And it looks like modernization, implementation of past recommendations and resources seem to be the current. Tech would be subsumed to modernization, is what I've heard Jason say. So we have a few other people queued up, and I definitely want to circle back to Katrina, who hopefully will be able to come on, but Kirsten is next.
Thank you, Alina. Kirsten Mitchell with the Office of Government Information Services. Alex Howard put a comment in the chat that I just want to read into the record. It was 20 minutes ago, so I just didn't want it to get lost. Alex's comment is yes to the appetite to extending FOIA-like process to legislative and judicial branch. This came up last term and is worth recommending again, especially support agencies, U.S. Capitol Police and that sort of thing.
Okay. Thanks, Kirsten.
Thanks, Alina.
All right, Gmende, you're next, and then Katrina, and then Stephanie.
Thank you, Alina. Bemende Johnson, University of Georgia. Since earlier we were talking about duplication, actually had a bit of a question. So one of the things that I mentioned was a survey of FOIA professionals to understand challenges, opportunities, understand what makes the job great, if they want to leave, why. But I also know from the Chief FOIA Officers Council meeting in April, there was also a discussion about a survey of FOIA professionals. And I'm wondering if that's moving forward or if it's maybe been fielded, because it seems like it's also an opportunity to get at this idea of challenging requests, trying to get away from the word vexatious, because, perhaps asking, those which requests, when you process them, which are the ones that are most difficult, and seeing which key terms are perhaps repeated most frequently to get an understanding of, not necessarily vexatious, but when we get requests of this nature, we have an extremely difficult time dealing with them because of X, Y, and Z. So there are a couple of things in there. The first one, and maybe that's for you, Alina and Bobby, about the survey recommendation from the Chief FOIA Officers Council, and maybe building in the question about the vexatious requests.
So, Bobby, I don't know if you want to comment. I'm just going to chime in and say that I think what you're referring to, Gmende, is the COCACI committee, which is the Cross-Agency Committee on innovation and collaboration. Did I get that right? Collaboration and innovation. I'm sorry if we just have labeled it COCACI. It's just so hard to remember anything else. It was actually a committee that was formed as a result of another FOIA Advisory Committee recommendation from a past term. They did launch a survey that closed August 31st to FOIA professionals. I don't remember, and I don't think overly burdensome requests was among the topics that they asked about. Bobby shaking his head no. Thank you for confirming that recollection. Bobby, any other thoughts on this?
Yeah, no, that's right. And I think I'm going back to I think the value of it being something studied under this committee term or this committee is bringing both sides view and insight to the table. So that's why I think it's really a good fit for the FACA.
Okay, thank you so much. Katrina, hopefully this time will work.
Yes. Okay. So one of the things I was going to say, and I didn't think that I was going to go this route when I first originally asked first for ideas, and this is Katrina Pavlikini with Department of Homeland Security. So I was actually going through the 51 recommendations, really while everybody's talking, just looking at them, and I really think that we need to go back and look at those because so far what I've looked at. And like I said, I looked through probably about 10 or 15 while people were talking. Every issue that we have, almost everything that's on this list for us to look at has been addressed somewhere in some form or fashion in these previous 51 recommendations. And so I really think, especially since, if I'm not mistaken, and correct me if I'm wrong because it's the first year I'm on here, isn't this the 5th year this committee has been in existence? Or you guys have this is the 5th rendition? Okay. So 5 years, you need to really start making a bang for the buck and show what we're making some looking at these 51 recommendations and taking them. And there are some of these are repeated. When I looked at the 51 recommendations, some of the committees previous times have reiterated or restated maybe just a little bit differently than a prior committee. I really think that we should focus on this, and I know some people might not agree with me, and that's fine. But in order for us, everything seems to be linked together now, the past to the future. And I think we need to really focus on this and because we could, I don't want us to look at anything and come up with an idea that was already thought of by someone else, because this is just going to continue to be a vicious cycle if we don't address what's been looked at the past, see what progress we've made on it, and then what further work needs to be done. And so that I'm going to stop there, and that's just my 2 cents worth. So,
okay.
And I did not think that was going to be something that I was going to, when I first asked me, I didn't think that this was going to be my way I was going to go. But I started looking at this, and I see a lot of value added from prior committees and councils, that recommendations, and we could really work from that and build off of that. And some of the things have been done, and we should recognize that they have in some areas.
Yes. Thanks, Katrina. I appreciate it. And this is exactly why we're having this dialogue, so we can all learn from each other, too. Okay, Stephanie, who's been very patient. Thank you.
Thank you. Stephanie Jewett, U.S. Department of the Interior, the Office of Inspector General. I just wanted to bring up that I had also raised that we look at raising the FOIA profile within agencies and how we gain support from senior leaders. My thoughts are if we do not have any support from senior leaders in agency, then it's very hard to do any of the things we are raising, such as getting FOIA resources, funding for staff, funding for technology, electronic. The other thing that I had raised that we look at, but I know it's not a popular topic, is which I think is one of the greatest issues facing the government right now, is the increase of FOIA litigation. The issue with the FOIA litigation, especially under the constructive denial litigations, is that most of the time you're put on a FOIA production schedule, and the ones addressing the, let's say, 500 pages a month are the very people who are the FOIA processors who are supposed to be doing the FOIA request. And what the requester community does not often know is that, yes, there may only be let's say 50 cases backlogged in front of you, but they don't know or realize that you also have to produce this 500. It doesn't get reported in the the DOJ annual report. It's very difficult to let requesters know that you are stuck with these very burdensome production schedules, which is fine. You missed your time frame. That's fair. But it's just, I just want to put another vote for FOIA resources. I think if we could somehow get leadership in government to get the funding that is needed, that would feed down for so many issues, including the FOIA litigation. If there's enough staff, then we wouldn't get sued so frequently for missing our timeframes. So another plug here for me for the FOIA Resources Funding Committee. I want to put in another vote that I would just say we still keep technology. I've heard what everyone said, and I think it's valuable, but I still think technology, like others have said, is such an up and coming thing for FOIA. Like so many have said as well, electronic records are where we're at. There's so many agencies that are struggling processing requests with just Adobe. They haven't expanded their resources. And the only way we're going to be able to speed up in the trickling effect of avoiding litigation and avoiding all these other things is to get the proper technology, to get the resources into the agencies. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you. Kirsten.
Yes, hi, Kirsten Mitchell, the Office of Government Information Services. I am reading another comment into the record, this from Alex Howard at 1112. Alex writes, I'm curious if agencies are aware this committee exists, much less if they've read any recommendations or adopted and implemented any of them. Understanding if there's a missing feedback loop or communications channel could be valuable in terms of maximizing the committee's impact and influence, past and present. So that might be a good comment for the follow-up committee or subcommittee.
Kirsten, also just to piggyback on that, Katrina commented what Stephanie was mentioning is addressed in a previous recommendation that I just read. Katrina, can you just loop us back to what Stephanie was, which part of what Stephanie was saying?
The part about the raising the profile of FOIA within leadership.
Right.
That was already mentioned in a previous, actually several, I think I read it 3 different times in some of the recommendations I was reading in. So that has been something that has been a recommendation all along. And then but I wanted to also say that I agree with her about the constructive denial. I think that is an issue we probably should address if it falls underneath the processing section too.
Okay, thanks, Katrina. David Collier wanted to share his screen again because he's been my de facto secretary, which I am loving. So David, can I turn it over to you? You kind of reclumped everything based on all the dialogue we've been having.
Well, sure. Again, just to try to get our subcommittees nailed down. All these are great comments, by the way. I love it. It's going to be a great term. If I can get the share screen thing, I can be God here for a second. And so I've been listening. I think I've put down the 3 options that I've heard, and correct me if I'm wrong. But basically, the 3 options that have seemed to boil up, if everybody can see that, great. So either a follow-up committee, resources, and implementation, or follow-up, implementation, modernization, break tech out, or resources, implementation, and modernization, no follow-up. Those are the 3 things I've heard, and I apologize if I didn't missed something that someone said. So, if you look at how it breaks out, and again, we're not going to have all these many working groups probably. So, but it's kind of how that would follow up on option 1. If we really believe follow-up's important. And I added, by the way, Tom, your comment, communicating, educating lawmakers on top priorities. How do we connect what this committee's works to impact, really, is what that's about. I like that idea if we want to explore that. Option 2, and I think this is what Jason was, some others, Alex and others were talking about, or follow-up. implementation, improvement, process, etc. Not including technology, and modernization, technology as its own separate thing. Now I only found 2 items in the spreadsheet that kind of fit under technology modernization, but I'm sure there are more, and I'm sure people could add more to this if they wanted. And of course, technology kind of fits across a lot of things. And then the third thing, and this I think was Tom, what I saw, he put it in the chat, eliminate the follow-up subcommittee and just go with resources, implementation, and modernization. So those are the 3 that I saw. And Jason, you made a good point, I think. It's like, yeah, I mean, the working groups, we can create any working group under anything, but it is worth figuring out early on what subcommittees we have, because they can drive the train in topic areas. But anyway, those are the 3 kind of things I saw. And I guess if I were to go with one, and I could change my mind if I hear more, but I still kind of gravitate toward option 1. I think it's follow up on and examining all this is important. And we will have to coordinate well, right? Because imagine a subcommittee doing this research, looking at what's been done. They're going to have to communicate to the other subcommittees, hey, we found that on the issue of fees, there's all this has been done. This is what's not been done. This is, not been achieved. We encourage you to maybe take this up, or what have you. Technology. So there's going to be it would be an interesting subcommittee, the follow up and how it works with the other subcommittees. But I think it's important. Resources seems to pop out, and then implementation, of course. I think that's a slam dunk. The question really is how much time and effort to spend on tech. I think is really the question, and of course, different people have different feelings on that. My feeling is it's to be part of implementation, because that's part of implementation, technology. But of course, certainly people may wish to break that out as a separate subcommittee instead of resources or follow-up. But I guess if I were to vote right now, I'd go option 1. If people went the other way, I wouldn't be all bent out of shape or anything.
All right, actually, Dave, could you leave your screen sharing up? Ginger wanted to make a comment, and I actually had the same question that Ginger does. Ginger, go ahead.
So my understanding of implementation, and I'm sorry, I'm currently scrolling back up on the chat. Okay, so Tom's framing was modernization, implementation, and resources. My understanding of implementation was that meant the implementation of prior recommendations by this committee and investigating that. And in that framing, I absolutely think those 3 are the right subcommittees, and would happily volunteer to co-chair the resources subcommittee because I feel that strongly about it. But I think modernization, implementation, and resources, I like that framing.
Oh, okay. So Tom, make sure I understand. What Ginger, you're saying it was what 3?
Modernization.
Modernization.
Modernization, implementation, which includes implementation of the prior recommendations.
Right.
And resources.
I threw those in there, and it includes all the process stuff and stuff.
I mean, I think the process stuff would probably get filed under modernization. That was sort of my thinking in it, but I'm happy to yield to others on that, and especially Tom. I'm happy to yield to Tom's interpretation of Tom's own words.
No, I mean, the process stuff would come out under all of them. I mean, I'd say probably 3/4 of the existing recommendations are process oriented, and so implementation would be by definition covering most process issues. And I think modernization, because of the technology implications for process, may be the more cutting edge and significant ones. But I do think that most of what we want to do does fall under those groupings. And yes, I just didn't like the follow-up. Just seems kind of pedestrian. I think implementation is more of a, kind of a big word, a multi-syllabic word. So I kind of like it better.
You and Jason are teaming up to come up with new and creative names. Okay, I'm with you guys.
Okay, so Tom,
Okay,
is that accurate on the screen there for what you're saying? By the way, I changed vexatious to voluminous. Just like last term, we recommended that no longer do we say glomar. It's neither confirm nor deny. Well, maybe this term we say no more vexatious. Let's call it voluminous or whatever.
Alex is shaking his head no.
Okay, I'm joking. Tom, is that accurate?
Well, it's little teeny type, and and the other thing is I'm not one to do committee drafting, so I think you generally got it, and people can add to it, and I'd leave to Kirsten and Alina to finalize a proposal for the committee.
Okay.
Alina, it's Jason Baird. So what's up on the screen at the moment is too ambitious for the modernization committee, I think, and it slides into lots of different subjects. So all I could say is that when we are finally ready to vote on this, I don't think we should, in our minds, be locked in that there are 14 working groups within modernization. I think these categories can be collapsed. Some of them I don't believe should be. I am a big proponent of what Alex named as modernization. He gets the prize for being proactive and creative here.
What was his name, Jason?
Modernization.
Oh,
modernization. Yeah.
And Alina,
sorry, Ben. I'll call on you in 1 second. I'd also just wanted to add, past experience has shown that working groups form and then sometimes they devolve into other working groups because they find that there's not enough traction gained on a particular subject. So I don't think any one of us should be wedded to all these subtopics. I do want to thank Dave for trying to group them. I think that's very helpful. It gives us a lot to think about as the subcommittees kick off. But no one should feel like they're wedded to all of these subtopics at any time. And a lot of them are very ambitious. So we may end up only getting to a few of them. Ben, go ahead, please.
Yeah, thank you. Ben from Ains, Ben Tingo. If we were here voting on these subcommittees today, I would agree with this formulation of being implementation / follow-up, resources, and modernization. And then to your point and Jason's point of leave the working group and the nitty-gritty identification of the subtopics to those subcommittees to sort of hash out and everything. But I hope this isn't throwing too much of a monkey wrench in the process, which is to say that it seems like we're all in agreement that review of prior implementations is very important to make sure that we're an effective committee. It's a good time period to take stock and to go back and review, and not only to make sure that we're effective and see what the log jams are on prior recommendations and check on the status of those, but also that given the volume of prior recommendations and the breadth of prior recommendations, those prior recommendations are going to, by necessity, have an impact on each one of these other subcommittees' activities, choices of topics, choices of working groups, and where their starting point even is and how they engage with these issues. So maybe I would just throw out there and take the temperature on whether it makes sense for us to take another cycle to really take stock as a committee of what the prior recommendations are, and then hash it out from there as to what the actual subcommittees would be, which may be that we end up with 2 subcommittees at that point, because we'll recognize that these follow-ups are going to be critical components of another subcommittee's working group topic. And then we can really have a better handle on what we're all going to be doing, rather than maybe having an implementation follow-up subcommittee do 3 months, 4 months of work and identifying what they're working on, only to find out that that's going to have a dramatic impact on what the modernization or resources subcommittee working groups have been working on for the past 3 or 4 months, which is going to potentially set them back or realize that we've been doing duplicative work all that time, which will end up with us all being a little bit less effective.
So then thanks for all those comments. First, I just want to say I always encourage the subcommittees as they get started to go back and review the prior recommendations. That's always a homework assignment that I think everyone should have, so we're not duplicating efforts. I also think your concepts are not mutually exclusive. I think we can continue with these subcommittees, and as we hone in our thoughts, perhaps we end up only tackling, a couple of these subjects for under each one. I think they're all very ambitious. But I'm also hearing folks who are feeling very strongly about the implementation follow-up, that they not only want to study what's already been implemented, but they really want to take the pulse, if you will, of agencies. Our agency's actually implementing recommendation name 2018-15. What have they done to implement? How can we study that further? What surveys might we be able to effect in order to find out whether agencies are following a particular recommendation? So I think what I've heard from folks is that they envision a pretty active engagement of trying to nail down exactly what's happening. So I don't want to detract from those folks who feel strongly about that with that subcommittee.
You want me to stop sharing the screen, or is everybody cool? Has a sense of stuff?
Yeah, I think I really want to start wrapping up because, gosh, can you guys believe it? We're almost, at our bewitching hour of public comments. And Alex, do you have one other comment you want to share?
Yes, I do. I just want to reflect that the process is part of the product here. And I think we just need to be careful about not focusing so much on committees and so much on the recommendations or report or white paper that comes out of that, but that the remit of this is to foster dialogue between the administration and the requester community, solicit public comments, and then make recommendations. And the more that we can create, I think, architectures of participation for that, the better. And as we talk about a lot of these different things, it strikes me that having the Office of Management and Budget involved in the committee would be relevant, both to the respect to a cap goal for FOIA, which used to exist but then disappeared the last 4 days, or 4 years rather. And the more that we can think about this committee as a vehicle for getting the requester community's concerns before the administration, the better. I don't want to just go down the rabbit hole of focusing only on committee assignments. I think we're going to lose a lot of people that way. That's what I wanted to share.
Okay. Tom.
Yeah, this is just a 1 minute comment responding to Ben. Kirsten, as our official officer, sits in on the subcommittee meetings, and she is a good link to prevent what you have concern about happening, which is one subcommittee going off and not knowing what anyone else is doing until they get to the end of the rope. So I found last year where we had way too many committees, too many subcommittees, too many working groups. Nonetheless, we did know what was going on. And as Alina said, as things went along, I guess Kirsten, some would disappear, some would be folded into another. So I think that all in all, the coordination function that OGIS performs works quite well.
Okay, so we're at 11:45. I would like to say that I think we've had a very, very robust discussion, as I expected that we would. I want to thank everyone for their comments. I'm generally hearing, and I'm going to exercise my chairperson rights at this point to the extent that I do have any. I'm definitely hearing a general consensus towards modernization, implementation of past recommendations, and resources as the three subcommittees, with lots of shifting around of working groups that can fall under each of those three. So I would like to ask if everyone is in favor of that, if I could get a voice vote or a hand vote. Let's take a quick vote on that now. I want to hear if there are any nays. Can we all vote on those three subcommittees? All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Aye, okay. All those opposing these three subcommittees? Okay, I hear silence. Okay, so we have our three subcommittees set. Working groups TBD. I would like to now solicit subcommittee co-chair volunteers. First for modernization.
I'll volunteer as a co-chair. It's Jason Barron.
Jason. I need a government person for modernization, please.
I wonder whether it makes sense for me to participate as well in that regard. Given
Gorka, was that you?
I've been working on the technology subcommittee at CPOPs. Yeah, Gorka Garcia and
Okay, so Gorka and
co-chair.
Jason, you have to promise to work nicely together.
I welcome Gorka to be a partner here.
Okay. Implementation, past recommendations.
This is Dave Coolier. I'm interested in that if nobody else is on the requester side anyway.
I would, but we could rock, paper, scissors, or you could have it.
An arrow.
Yeah.
I heard
This is Katrina. I wouldn't mind doing it on the government side.
Okay, so Katrina and Dave Collier for implementation. Okay.
Yeah, and I don't have
I'm not ignoring you. Alex, I saw you too. I really appreciate all the enthusiasm. And then resources. I'm sorry, Dave, go ahead.
Sorry, Alina, I was just going to say, I mean, I certainly, if someone really wants to do it, I'm happy to let them on the requester side for implementation.
No, Era will serve on that subcommittee and she will work very hard.
Not sharing. Sorry, I did not mean to put my hand up.
Let me just say, Alina, it's Jason Barron, that David did yeoman service in writing up reports in the last term, and he would serve as chair extremely well.
I think David will do a great job.
Yeah, I second that as well. But Ben, you're welcome to join all three subcommittees. So we really want your participation.
By the way, I was a member of 3 subcommittees last term. I encourage you to do it if you have nothing else going in your life. So, otherwise, if
I'm not on David's committee anymore.
Yeah, don't. I would just. There's benefits, but I'd discourage more than 2. One's probably fine. That's just my experience. Others may have other thoughts.
Okay. All right. So resources is the last one. Do I have a volunteer?
I volunteer a million times over.
Ginger for non-government. Do I have a government volunteer for resources? Come on, guys.
Paul Chalmers from PBGC, I'll volunteer.
Okay, Paul, thank you very much. You've been silent the whole time. I chatted you to make sure you didn't have anything to say, but thank you for volunteering for the co-chairman. Sure. So just to review, modernization, Jason and Gorka, implementation, Dave Collier, Katrina Pavlikinen, resources, Ginger, and Paul Chalmers, right? Do I have that all right? Okay. Again, everyone should join all 3 subcommittees, despite what Dave Collier just said. Okay, so let me turn now to our public comments part of our meeting. And I know that we look forward to hearing from non-committee participants who might have ideas or comments to share. I want to remind everyone that this is not the appropriate venue for concerns about individual FOIA requests or non-FOIA topics. Again, if you need OGIS assistance, please feel free to email us at ogis@nara.gov. All oral comments are captured in the transcript of the meeting, which we will post as soon as it is available. And just a reminder, public comments are limited to 3 minutes per person. So as I turn over to this section, I'm going to first ask Kimberly and Kirsten to let us know if there have been any relevant questions or comments that have come in through WebEx chat. I'll give you a second to collect your thoughts. And Chris, I'm going to ask if you could give instructions on folks who could call in through the telephone line.
Sure. And as a reminder, if you would like to if you would like to make a comment on WebEx, you can do so by pressing on the raise hand icon located at the bottom right of your participants panel. And if you are dialed into the phone line, please press #2 on your telephone keypad, and we will call on you.
Okay, so Kirsten and Kimberly, do we have any comments on chat?
Yes, so this is Kirsten Mitchell, Office of Government Information Services. Before we get to the public comment, I just want to read one of Ginger's comment or Ginger's chats into the record. She was responding to an earlier chat, and she says she thinks that most agencies are aware of the FOIA Advisory Committee, but they are in triage mode, just trying to keep up with requests. When resources are this limited, agencies are not able to address best practices. So just wanted to read that into the record. And before I turn it over to Kimberly, we got quite a few comments about vexatious requests. Comments such as, why are you calling requesters vexatious? Please stop calling us this. It is inappropriate and disrespectful. I will say that I think we totally agree with that. And Bobby addressed this in his comments earlier. And another commenter noted the problem is resources, not requesters submitting complex requests. So I just wanted to get those thoughts into the record. And then I want to turn it over to Kimberly because I think there are one or two more comments. So over to you, Kimberly.
Thank you, Kirsten. Kimberly Reed, National Archives. We do have one that I wanted to share from a commenter who, this is a comment for the committee. Have we collectively considered limiting the scope of the focus of a subcommittee to facilitate taking one bite at a time versus trying to work on too broad of a topic? In other words, think of the old cliche about eating an elephant one bite at a time. So I think you all have kind of discussed a little bit of that already, but that was pointed out as you all were having your conversations. And that is all we have.
All right, thanks, Kimberly. Chris, anyone waiting on our telephone line to make a comment?
It looks like we do have one caller in queue. And caller, your line is unmuted.
Yes, hi, good morning. This is Bob Hammond. Great stuff. I need to get this into the record for Deborah Wall and Vanita Gupta. It is deeply disturbing that NARA disabled the YouTube chat for the 8th September and today's meeting. My comments are professional and relevant. I had not planned to, but I placed them into the all panelists chat to be part of the official record. This is an advisory committee. We need to let members of the public participate. I've already submitted an OIG complaint, and you may expect a congressional inquiry. So, life as a grandpa is good. My 9-year-old grandson played his third ever baseball game, got his first hit, and scored a run. Life in FOIA is not good. In fact, it sucks. And things are going in the wrong direction, which is why I'm spending my precious time with you today. I'd rather be playing Tea Party with my 7-year-old granddaughter. When my time expires, I'll be calling back in to use the full 15 minutes allotted for public comments if there are no other callers. You've all heard me say, I believe agency budgets should contain a line item for FOIA supported by what they would do to improve FOIA, increase staff and grade levels, reduce backlogs, etc. Place the onus on OMB and Congress to provide funding. In my conversations with Senate and House staff, Congress is receptive to supporting line item budgets. That's not direct funding from Congress, that's a budget in every agency's budget line item. Lack of funding is the greatest impediment to FOIA for OGIS, DOJ, OIP, and the agencies. When I talk to chief FOIA officers and FOIA professionals, the message is always the same. As they told GAO in its FOIA audit this year, litigation is skyrocketing and draining resources to process FOIA requests and increasing backlogs. And everyone is underfunded. OGIS mediation by statute is supposed to reduce litigation. I do not believe that OGIS has done a single mediation case in years. OGIS owes that answer to this committee. Closing 4,100 mediation cases with 3 people, if that can be believed, is one every hour and a half. and that doesn't include bathroom breaks or a cup of coffee. Then DOJ data supporting the GAO findings is completely inaccurate and unusable for any purpose. Bobby and Alina had a tough time at the Senate Judiciary hearing regarding the utter lack of FOIA compliance and oversight mediation. Both are grossly underfunded. The problem lies with NARA and the Archive of the United States, Deb Wall, and DOJ's Vanita Gupta. Every meeting I ask OGIS and DOJ OIP about.
I do apologize. That is 3 minutes on the timer, and at this time, I do not see any more hands raised.
Okay, Chris, thank you very, very much. Out of respect for everyone's time, I want to just check in to see if there are any other public commenters. Kimberly, anyone else submitted any comments?
Not at this time.
Okay, all right. So I just want to thank everyone today for the robust conversation that we've had. The hard work begins now, so please roll up your sleeves, volunteer for subcommittees. You all know who the subcommittee co-chairs are. We can facilitate conversations among subcommittees and intra-subcommittee conversations. So Kirsten and I are ready and able to help. I want to thank everyone today for joining us. I hope everyone continues to remain safe, healthy, and resilient. And we will see each other again virtually in the same space at our next meeting, Thursday, December 1st, 2022, from 10 to noon or possibly 10 to 1 p.m. Usually our typical meetings go 3 hours. We typically take a 10 to 15-minute break, so that's what I expect. Any committee members have any questions or concerns before we adjourn?
Alina, it's Jason.
Yes.
Well, given the time period until the next public meeting, I would expect that you and Kirsten will be sending out messages to everyone to quickly make decisions with respect to subcommittees, and then subcommittee chairs to reach out to begin holding subcommittee meetings. Am I right?
Yes, and thanks for pointing that out. I think the success of the last 2 committee terms in particular were in no small part due to the fact that subcommittee co-chairs set regular meetings, monthly or bi-monthly, bi-weekly, whatever you would like. It's completely your call as to cadence, but I think having regular times is really important. And if you can set it up so it works for most folks, that's ideal.
And for Kirsten.
Yes.
And for Kirsten, yes, we have to work around her schedule. She is the DFO under FACA. She has to attend all subcommittee meetings.
I will point out we have 2 alternate DFOs.
Yes,
so should I get hit by a bus or something, we will have continuity.
All right, hopefully that will never happen. Okay, so we're at 11:59 a.m. I just want to thank everyone again for your time and for your anticipated work. And we stand adjourned. Thanks very much, everyone.